From the American Civil War to the present day, the clang of ships' bells, the splash of side wheels, the blast from dome, chime, and deep-throated typhoon whistles, the blare of diesel air horns and electric klaxons, the melodious dinner call of an Old Bay-lined waiter, and ship launchings at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company have all been among the maritime voices of Chesapeake Bay and Hampton Roads. Some of these voices were once familiar, daily ones, while others, like the deep reverberating roar of the magnificent SS United States slipping into Hampton Roads for an annual inspection by her builders, the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, were unusual enough to bring residents of waterfront homes running to their windows. The first American superliner in over a century to capture the Atlantic Blue Ribbon from foreign greyhounds, SS United States boasts one of the mightiest voices in the world. Following one of her visits to Newport News Shipbuilding, she greets us with her Leslie diaphragm or typhoon whistle. Manufactured in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, this ultra-modern steam-driven whistle is favored by superliners and naval vessels because of its ability to give instantaneous response even after being inactive for many hours in sub-zero temperatures. As recently as the spring of 1962, genuine Norfolkians and Baltimoreans recognized at least two of the voices of Chesapeake Bay, those of the Old Bay liners City of Norfolk and City of Richmond, alternating on their nightly Norfolk-Baltimore run with passengers and freight. Founded in 1840, the Old Bay Line, more formally the Baltimore Steam Packet Company, lived to become the oldest steamship company in America and the last to operate overnight passenger steamers year-round on inland waters. Lone survivors of a bygone golden era when many coastwise steamers plied the bay, City of Norfolk and City of Richmond retired in April 1962, ending a Chesapeake Bay tradition which had then spanned 6 wars, 12 decades, and 122 years of our national heritage. American history buffs may be interested to learn that Edgar Allan Poe is believed to have spent one of the last nights of his life, September 27th or 28th, 1849, aboard an Old Bay liner, en route from Richmond to Baltimore, probably via Norfolk and Old Point Comfort. Built by the Maryland Steel Company for the former Chesapeake Line, City of Norfolk slid down the ways at Sparrows Point on December 3, 1910, making her maiden voyage down the bay to Norfolk on April 29, 1911. She and her 297.5-foot twin sister, City of Baltimore, each boasted 148 staterooms and a cruising speed of 18.5 knots. En route to Norfolk on the night of July 29, 1937, City of Baltimore caught fire and burned to her waterline, claiming 3 lives. While commanded by the late Captain Edward James, City of Norfolk rode out the great August storm of August 22nd, 23rd, 1933, running hard aground off Watts Island, where she and her passengers remained stuck fast for several days. At the time these recordings were made, City of Norfolk was commanded by Captain Patrick L. Parker, then the Old Bay Line senior master, and a veteran of more than 40 years on the bay. The slightly smaller 261.6-foot City of Richmond, also built by Maryland Steel, was launched September 6, 1913, originally running with her twin sister, City of Annapolis, on the York River line between Baltimore and West Point, Virginia. At 1:20 a.m. on February 24, 1927, while plowing through dense fog in the pre-radar era, City of Richmond and City of Annapolis locked in a near head-on collision off Smith's Point in the Upper Bay, writing an epitaph for the Annapolis and for one of her passengers. Ironically, in March 1946, City of Richmond became the first vessel in the entire American merchant marine to be equipped with radar. At the time these recordings were made, City of Richmond was commanded by the late Captain Samuel Boyd Chapman, who had been intimately associated with the steamer since she was new. As the steamer leaves Norfolk for Baltimore, we'll hear Captain Chapman issuing helm orders to his quartermaster. The engine room telegraph is in the background.
Engineer at standby. Engineer at standby. Engineer ready, sir. Lowering that go. Lowering that go, sir. All clear ahead. All clear ahead, sir. 2 turns wheel left. 2 turns wheel left, sir. 2 turns to left, sir. Half speed ahead. Half speed ahead, sir. Answer half speed ahead, sir. All clear. All clear, sir. There you go. There you go, sir. Go one. Go one, sir.
One other steamer from this golden era, the former Norfolk and Washington steamboat District of Columbia, survived into the mid-1960s, running as the Province town in New England waters as recently as the summer of 1964. Built in 1924-1925 by the Pusey and Jones Corporation of Wilmington, Delaware, the 297.8-foot District of Columbia held her Norfolk, Washington run till service ended September 30th, 1957. En route to Norfolk without the aid of radar on the foggy morning of October 31st, 1948, shortly after making her stop at Old Point Comfort, she collided with the Texaco tanker Georgia at anchor in Hampton Roads, claiming the life of one of her passengers. Though confined to her superstructure, District of Columbia's damages were extensive. Upon receiving repair estimates, Norfolk and Washington Steamboat Company officials took a long, hard look at declining revenues, deciding to call it quits after more than half a century of operations. The Old Bay Line stepped in and bought the steamer. On May 5, 1949, representing an investment of $287,468, following extensive repairs and improvements, she resumed her old run. At the time these recordings were made on the Old Bay Line Wharf, at the head of West Main Street in Norfolk, District of Columbia lay on the north side of the pier, with City of Richmond berthed on the south side. Commanded by her longtime skipper, Captain Edward H. Eaton, District of Columbia is scheduled to shortly depart for Washington, D.C. She sounds one long blast on leaving the pier, and City of Richmond salutes her.
All ashore, that's going ashore. The last call.
Possessing one of the mellowest voices ever heard on Chesapeake Bay, District of Columbia returns the salute with her chime whistle. With the passing of such companies as Eastern Steamship Lines, the Merchants and Miners Transportation Company, the Norfolk and Washington Steamboat Company, the Chesapeake Steamship Company, and finally the Old Bay Line, regular passenger service from Norfolk to New York, Boston, Washington, and Baltimore is no longer available via water, and many once familiar Chesapeake Bay voices have long ago been stilled. Casualties of World War II, whose hard-pressed allies claimed most of their vessels for war service abroad, these lines found it unprofitable to rebuild in post-war years for competition with trucks, buses, and planes. For this reason, such voices as those of the Robert E. Lee, George Washington, Chatham, Fairfax, and Dorchester resound only in the memories of older area residents who watched many of these vessels making headlines for themselves during the war. Especially notable was the Dorchester, the former merchants and miners vessel torpedoed in the North Atlantic February 3, 1943, with a loss of 605 persons, including the famous 4 chaplains of different faiths. Just 2 blocks north of the Old Bay Line wharf in Norfolk, the Nippon Inn steamer Elisha Lee is lying alongside her Brook Avenue pier, preparing to depart for Old Point Comfort, en route to meet her inbound Pennsylvania Railroad train at Cape Charles. Built by Harlan and Hollingsworth at Wilmington, Delaware in 1892, she was originally christened Richard Peck. This steamer boasts twin stacks, a length of 303.3 feet, a beam of 48 feet, and twin screws propelled by engines originally rated at 2,906 horsepower. Not surprisingly, as the Richard Peck, she held many speed records on Long Island Sound in her younger years. Then home ported in New London, Connecticut, she once carried as many as 81 crewmen. Commanded by Captain J.E. Bridges, Elisha Lee sounds one long blast promptly at 10:20 a.m. as she departs Norfolk. As Captain Bridges eases her into the stream, she and the Old Bay Line's Norfolk and Washington steamer District of Columbia exchange salutes, the blast being acknowledged by both vessels. Captain E.H. Eaton is master of the District of Columbia. Retiring at the ripe old age of 61 in 1953, Elisha Lee became the last in her historic line of steamers to pass on to Valhalla. Formerly sailing from the opposite side of the same Brook Avenue pier in Norfolk was the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway steamer Virginia, affectionately called Smoky Joe by the old salts who loved her. Built by the W.R. Trigg Company of Richmond in 1902, she was originally christened Berkeley. With a length of 191 feet, a beam of 32 feet, and a depth of 12 feet, Virginia carried a crew of 23. Her 2,400 horsepower 4-cylinder triple expansion reciprocating steam engine made her the fastest steamer in Hampton Roads as she rushed her passengers from Brook Avenue in Norfolk to their waiting C&O trains in Newport News. Periodically, her speed during frequent unofficial harbor races got her into trouble with the Coast Guard and with others concerned about damages from her wake. Her pop valves were ordered set back to lower steam pressures in an effort to slow her down. But whenever Captain Knight was intent on winning a race, he'd have her engineers hang heavy wrenches on her pop valves, bringing her up to full speed anyway. Her whistles have been preserved by the Mariners Museum at Newport News. Certainly, one other vessel along with the Elisha Lee and the Virginia cannot be overlooked among the maritime voices of Hampton Roads. This was the voice of the Southern Railway tug Memphis, who lived to become the oldest tug in Norfolk Harbor. Built as the City of Chester at Chester, Pennsylvania back in 1872, she was 109 feet long, had a beam of 22.5 feet, and a depth of 8 feet. She was powered by a 360 horsepower steam engine. As the Memphis, she carried passengers and freight back and forth between downtown Norfolk and Penner's Point in Portsmouth, connecting there with Southern Railway trains. Sometimes whistles outlive their ships. This is the case of the former Mobjack Bay steamboat General Matthews, whose voice is still heard daily in Norfolk, though the steamer herself burned to her waterline in March of 1930. Built as the Quaker City at Philadelphia in 1901, she joined the Maine Central Railroad while still new, operating out of Portland, Maine as the Sieur de Moore. Drafted by Uncle Sam into World War I, the 155.5-foot steamer, boasting a 1,000 horsepower engine, served the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps as their major lawn font. She was purchased by the Norfolk and Mobjack Bay Steamboat Company in 1923, sailing from the head of West City Hall Avenue in Norfolk as the General Matthews, till claimed by fire March 23rd, 24th, 1930. Today, her salvaged whistle is operated by the Norfolk Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Corporation, where it summons workmen to their jobs and announces welcomed lunch hours and quitting time. Prior to the opening of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel in 1957, two ferry crossings, one between Pine Beach, Norfolk and Boat Harbor, Newport News, and the other between Willoughby Spit and Hampton, linked Norfolk to the lower Virginia Peninsula. 6 ferries, 4 steam and 2 diesels, held the picturesque 30-minute Pine Beach Boat Harbor crossing. The contrast between steam whistles and diesel air horns makes an interesting study. First, we hear the 1,100 horsepower steam ferry Warwick, built at Wilmington, Delaware as the Chelsea in 1923. She boasted a length of 189.5 feet and a beam of 36.1 feet. Next, we hear the entirely different air horn of the 700 horsepower diesel-electric Sewell's Point. Originally built as the Grenville Cane at Camden, New Jersey in 1926, she later became the New York Harbor ferry Palisades. She had a length of 145.6 feet and a 37.1-foot beam. The air horn of the 1,100 horsepower diesel-driven Ocean City follows. Also built at Wilmington, Delaware in 1923, Ocean City's dimensions were identical to those of the Warwick. The steam whistle of the Newport News, built at Wilmington, Delaware as the Philadelphia in 1926, is heard next. As the Philadelphia, she once ran for the Reading Company on the Delaware River. Built at Wilmington, Delaware in 1925, the Hampton Roads was the only steam ferry built expressly for this run, and not like many of her running mates imported from other waters. Sporting engines rated at 1,400 horsepower, she had a length of 185.8 feet and a beam of 46.7 feet. Her melodious steam whistle followed. The side-wheel beam engine ferry Chesapeake, built at Wilmington, Delaware as the Buffalo in 1897, was one of the last 3 such ferries operating on the Atlantic seaboard as of 1950. With a length of 192 feet and a beam of 36 feet, Chesapeake greets us with her tritone chime whistle. After blowing her tritone chime whistle, Chesapeake gives us a first-hand demonstration of the rather complex signaling system, by which pilot house orders are transmitted to the engine room on vessels not equipped with the more modern engine room telegraph. The uninitiated listener will be startled to learn that not only may the same signal pattern have more than one meaning, but also a given pilot house order may be communicated by more than one signal pattern. For this reason, engineers had to constantly keep in mind what their previous order had been in order to properly execute each succeeding order from the pilot house. As bells and jingles sound, we will hear Chesapeake's engineers executing the following pilot house orders. Jingle, engine room, stand by. 1 bell and jingle, full speed ahead. 2 bells, stop. 2 bells, half speed astern. 1 bell, stop. 1 bell and jingle, full speed ahead. 4 bells and jingle, full speed astern. 1 bell, stop. 1 bell, half speed ahead. 1 bell, stop. Jingle, finished with engines. Aboard the Chesapeake, the cowbell was used to cancel the last engine room order given. Here, the captain concluded that he wasn't finished with her engines after all. Two of the ferries holding the Willoughby Spit Hampton Run were the 148.3-foot diesel-powered City of Hampton, built at Baltimore in 1930, and her venerable running mate, the 156-foot City of Richmond. Not to be confused with the Old Bay liner by the same name, the ferryboat City of Richmond was built as the Virginia at Chester, Pennsylvania back in 1896. Along with the ferry Chesapeake, the ferry City of Richmond held the distinction of being one of the last 3 side-wheel beam engine ferryboats to operate on the Atlantic seaboard as of 1950. Above the noises from the City of Richmond's 500-horsepower beam engine, we'll hear her exchange salutes with her running mate, City of Hampton, during one of her crossings. In the spring of 1961, one voice blending with others of the Hampton Roads steamship population was unique. Filled with the triumphs and tragedies of history, it was the voice of the two-throated whistle branch from Admiral David Glasgow Farragut's flagship, USS HARTFORD. Heroine of the Battle of Mobile Bay, August 5, 1864, she was launched at the Boston Navy Yard November 22, 1858, and was completed in June 1859. The brave old steam sloop of war was scrapped in Norfolk in 1957 after spending the last 12 of her 99 years lying idle at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. But her dome and chime whistles were preserved by the Navy. In April 1961, with the Civil War centennial at hand, they were returned to Norfolk by special permission from Washington to be blown for recordings. As the full resonant tones of an earlier age sounded, after their many years of silence, knowing listeners thought back nearly a century to a voyage heralded by those same blasts. It was from the Hartford, being provisioned at Old Point Comfort in 1862, that Admiral Farragut married to a Norfolk girl, the former Miss Virginia Loyal, and living in Norfolk when the war broke out, wrote his wife that it seemed strange to look across Hampton Roads and to realize that Norfolk, then still in Confederate hands, was enemy territory. With the last voyage of the old bay liner City of Norfolk up the bay to Baltimore on the night of Friday, April 13, 1962, area residents suddenly realized that the golden era of Chesapeake Bay steamboating had definitely come to an end. The former Washington, D.C. fireboat William T. Belt led the solemn procession that evening, spurting great streams of saline tears high into the setting sun, as the following City of Norfolk received salutes from every vessel in Norfolk Harbor. Off the Norfolk Naval Base as twilight faded into darkness, City of Norfolk and the William T. Belt exchanged final farewell salutes as the curtains fell on the last act of this dramatic era. With darkness closing in, and City of Norfolk fading off into the distance and into the annals of American steamboating history, the discerning observer found himself haunted by these lines from Alfred Lord Tennyson. The old order changeth, yielding place to new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world.